Hey guys, tonight we drift back through the smoke and the soot right into the damp dawn air of a Victorian slum. The alleys are narrow, the stones uneven, and the walls on either side lean close as though they want to swallow you whole. You're breathing in the scent of last night's coal fires mixed with the sharper tang of horse dung and cabbage water, and you probably won't survive this without a sturdy immune system. That's just the honest truth. One lungful of this air, and you'd be shopping for a coffin in no time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps me know these late-night rambles are worth your time. And hey, why not drop a quick comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you? It's oddly comforting to imagine these smoky alleys echoing across different time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fog hangs low, caught in every crooked archway and chimney. You trudge past uneven cobblestones, slick from overnight rain, your boots, if you even had them, squelching at every step. A cart rumbles past, pulled by a tired horse whose ribs show through the hide, and you hear the hawker's voice cutting through the mist. Hot pies. Penny pies! The warmth from his cart smells inviting, though you know it's more bone and gristle than meat. That was dinner for many, and breakfast too, if you were lucky. This is London in the late 1800s, though the same scene could be found in Manchester, Liverpool, or Glasgow. The Industrial Revolution promised prosperity, but prosperity here seems to have skipped the queue and gone straight to the factory owners. For the poor, dawn begins not with leisure but with labor. Families huddle in dim rooms, waiting for daylight to guide them to shifts that stretch 12 or 14 hours. Your ears catch the drip of rain through a broken roof, the squeak of rats as they dart between barrels, and the muffled cough of a child starting another weary day. Historians still argue whether the infamous London fog was mostly coal smoke, river mist, or a bit of romantic exaggeration, but everyone agrees it clung to skin and clothes until you could smell yourself coming down the street. Imagine trying to flirt in this haze. Hardly candlelight dinner vibes, every doorway holds a story. Some are ragged shops with fronts painted long ago, peeling down to bare wood. Others are taverns already open, offering gin at the price of a loaf. And then there are the dwellings, tenements with stairs that creak under too many feet, plaster cracked and flaking, every sound magnified. Privacy is a myth here. You sneeze and 5 neighbors bless you through the walls. You pass women scrubbing stoops, brushing away yesterday's mud, as though clean stones might invite better fortune. Children dart past barefoot, their toes black with grime, laughing despite it all. Laughter rings oddly against the gray air, sharp like the chiming of a tin bell. A boy pushes a barrow piled with firewood scraps scavenged from carpenter's bins, hoping to sell kindling door to door. That's his family's bread money. And there's the fringe tidbit. Believe it or not, some slum residents kept pigs inside their homes, fattening them in cellars or corners of single-room dwellings. The smell was appalling, but pigs meant extra food scraps turned into meat. When winter came, that pig was survival. Imagine your landlord frowning at the noise while you argue, "Don't worry, it's just my roommate, Mr. Snuffles." The morning fog parts a little as the streets wake. Milkmaids clink cans, newsboys cry headlines about Parliament or another scandal, though most slum dwellers don't read. One headline in particular talks of reform, people outside these alleys debating how to save those within. You walk under a dripping arch, and somewhere above, laundry flaps weakly, more gray than white. Strings of shirts and petticoats swaying like flags of surrender. Your feet carry you past the communal water pump, already crowded. Women queue with buckets, gossiping in low voices. One grumbles about the landlord raising rent again. Another mutters about a cousin lost to the fever. Everyone knows someone carried off by disease. The pump handle creaks, water trickles, and in the background an old man coughs like his lungs are shaking loose. This is life in motion, survival wrapped in routine. You brush shoulders with a man carrying coal dust on every surface of his body, even his eyelashes. He smells of soot, but also of pride. He has work today. Employment, even if it killed you young, was better than begging. He nods at you, a brief acknowledgement, and moves on. The slum is crowded, yet strangely anonymous. Hundreds of lives stacked together, but few look each other in the eye. And as the light slowly strengthens, you catch sight of something fragile. A little girl carrying a cracked teacup with great care, her bare feet hopping over puddles. Inside is a single flower, probably stolen from a park or a rich man's doorstep. She sets it on a windowsill as though one blossom could fend off all the grime. And in a way it does. Even here, surrounded by soot, life insists on beauty, if only for a moment. The alley narrows as you turn, and a heavy door creaks open just ahead. You step inside, ducking beneath a lintel that seems ready to collapse, and suddenly you are in the world of the Victorian tenement. The smell changes immediately. Less horse dung, more damp plaster, mold, and the faint tang of boiled potatoes that clings like a stubborn memory. It is here, behind these warped doors, that entire families squeeze themselves into rooms no larger than a modern walk-in closet. The first thing you notice is the walls. Thin plaster cracks spider out from the corners, revealing brick beneath, like bones poking through pale skin. You press your hand against one, cold, damp, slick with condensation. Wallpaper peels away in curling ribbons, a faded floral pattern now stained by candle soot. Privacy here isn't just scarce, it's impossible. Every argument, every lullaby, every cough echoes through those paper-thin partitions. One family's snore is another's lullaby, whether you want it or not. A woman hurries past, balancing a pail of water, her skirt hemmed damp and frayed. She mutters apologies as she squeezes by, and you realize the hallway is barely wide enough for two people. The stairs groan under your weight, the wood worn smooth by generations of bare feet. You think for a moment about the fire risk, and yes, that's the grim joke of it. One careless candle and this entire structure could turn into a pyre faster than you can say insurance fraud. And no, poor tenants never saw a penny of compensation. You reach the first room and step inside. A family of 7 squeezes into a single chamber. The bed, if you can call it that, is a sagging wooden frame with rope laced across, covered in a thin mattress stuffed with straw. 2 children curl together at the foot, and their younger brother sleeps crosswise, toes dangling in the cold. In the corner, a cradle rocks gently, not from a hand, but from the scurrying of a rat that brushed past the rope. The mother hushes the baby, not even glancing at the intruder. Vermin are as common as wallpaper here. Historians still argue whether landlords were genuinely ignorant of these conditions or simply didn't care, but the truth seems obvious when you stand here. Tenants paid rent often shockingly high for what little they got, while the owners raked in profit. Some slumlords made fortunes while never once stepping inside their properties. Out of sight, out of conscience, you notice one quirky detail: newspapers pasted across the walls. Families use them for insulation, patching holes, and blocking drafts. Imagine dozing off with Queen Victoria's face staring at you from the wall, or a headline about empire expansion doubling as your wallpaper. Not exactly architectural digest material, but it kept the wind out, sometimes. The air is thick, heavy with coal smoke that seeps from a single fireplace. A pot bubbles faintly, releasing the meager scent of cabbage broth. You can't help but imagine the endless repetition of that meal, night after night, until even your dreams smell like boiled greens. And still, you'd eat gratefully because hunger gnawed at every belly here. A girl about 10 years old sits at the table, polishing boots for a few pennies. She hums softly, though her song is muffled by the rasp of cloth on leather. Her younger brother plays nearby with a wooden spool tied to a string, his only toy. The sound of joy, however small, floats in the gloom like sunlight through dirty glass. You step into the next dwelling, and the story repeats with slight variations. More children, fewer blankets, an old grandmother in the corner wheezing, her breath rattling like the final tick of a clock. The floorboards sag where too many feet have shuffled across. A single candle flickers, the wax dribbling onto the table, forming a stalactite of hardened drips. Then you notice a peculiar scent, something sharp, chemical. A bottle of cheap disinfectant sits on a shelf. Families clung to such products, convinced they kept away miasmas, the bad air blamed for disease. Some even hung herbs or garlic by the window, hoping to ward off cholera. Of course, science later showed germs didn't much care about garlic's reputation. But desperate times bred desperate remedies. A baby cries again down the hall, and the sound blends with coughing, with footsteps, with creaks. The tenement is alive, but not in a comforting way. It thrums with noise, vibration, with the sense that life here is pressed into too small a container, like steam straining against the lid of a pot. And yet, against the odds, you notice small acts of pride. A shawl folded neatly. A jug of flowers, though wilted, placed center on a table. A scrap of lace tacked across a window. Even in such crushing poverty, beauty was claimed where it could be, as if to insist, "We are more than this grime." You lean against the stair rail as you descend again. It wobbles dangerously, but you steady yourself. Behind you, a child giggles at something unseen, and the sound echoes down the dark stairwell like a defiant bell. Life continues even here, behind doors that creak but never quite collapse. The tenement door slams behind you, and the morning clatter pulls you back out into the streets. The fog has lifted a little, replaced by the sharper scent of coal smoke curling from chimneys. It's not peaceful, though. It's the hour when the slum stirs into motion. You hear boots pounding, wooden clogs clattering, and the shuffle of bare feet heading toward work. Labor waits and no one dares be late. You follow the flow of bodies. Children as young as 6 trail behind their parents, carrying bundles of tools or lunches wrapped in rags. One boy struggles to balance a basket of half-stale bread loaves, his small frame almost bent double. Beside him, his sister clutches a tin pail that rattles with the sound of nails and hammers. Her day's work will be at a carpentry shop, though she won't be paid more than a few pennies. Childhood here is swallowed whole by industry. The factories loom ahead, dark silhouettes against the pale sky. Tall brick chimneys belch smoke that merges with the morning haze, blotting out even the weak sun. You can almost taste the soot as it settles on your tongue, gritty and bitter. Inside, the air will be worse, hot, choking, filled with dust. And still, these are the places where slum dwellers earn their survival. One mainstream historical fact hits you like a hammer. By the mid-19th century, Britain's factories ran on child labor. Nearly 1 in 5 textile workers was under the age of 13. Imagine your average third grader tending a machine with spinning gears sharp enough to take off a hand, and you'll see how grimly normal it was. Parliament passed laws to restrict hours, but enforcement was laughable. Inspectors were rare, and foremen had tricks for hiding underage workers when officials came knocking. The clang of metal fills the air as you step into a foundry yard. Sparks burst from hammers striking hot iron, glowing embers drifting like fireflies. Men with blackened faces heave against heavy molds, their muscles straining. The heat sears your skin even from a distance. A boy no taller than your shoulder scurries by, carrying a bucket of water that sloshes dangerously. He's not here for education. He's here because his family can't eat without his wages. And then comes the fringe tidbit. Climbing boys, as they were called, often worked as chimney sweeps. They'd wriggle up soot-choked chimneys, scraping with brushes until they emerged gasping, covered head to toe in grime. Some even suffered permanent lung damage or worse, a disease known as soot wart, a form of cancer first discovered in chimney sweeps. Imagine explaining that job title on a dating profile. Professional chimney wriggler, risk of spontaneous combustion included. You follow a group into a textile mill. The roar is immediate, machines rattling, gears spinning, belts slapping. The sound is so loud you feel it in your chest. Rows of looms stretch into the distance, each attended by a gaunt figure hunched in concentration. The air is filled with lint, tiny fibers floating in the beams of dusty light. Workers cough, but no one dares stop weaving. A moment's pause could mean dismissal. Historians still argue whether the working class had more solidarity than division. Did neighbors band together in fierce loyalty, or did desperation breed mistrust? Standing here, you feel both forces tugging. On one hand, a worker quietly guides a child's hands away from a dangerous cog. On the other, eyes glance suspiciously at you, as though worried you might be a thief stealing precious hours or wages. The whistle shrieks suddenly, splitting the air. Break time. You watch men and women shuffle outside, collapsing onto crates or curbs, chewing at crusts of bread. A boy sucks on a single onion, holding it like treasure, while his sister gulps water from a tin cup. Food is fuel, not pleasure, and yet laughter bubbles up here and there, rough jokes traded between weary breaths. One man quips that if the lint doesn't kill him, his wife's cabbage soup surely will. Even misery allows for gallows humor. You drift further to the coal yards, where carts unload heaps of black stone. Workers shovel endlessly, the air thick with dust. Their skin shines with sweat, their hair plastered flat, their eyes squinting through the haze. Coal dust creeps into every fold of clothing, every pore of skin. A single spark could turn the heap into an inferno, but no one dares slow down. Wages are counted by cart, and every shovelful means survival. Not all labor is industrial. On the streets, women hawk flowers, oranges, or matches, their cries competing with the roar of traffic. A girl no older than 8 shouts, "Matches! Buy your matches!" Her basket is nearly empty, but you suspect she'll carry the unsold sticks back home, where they'll be burned for heat. That's her profit margin, nothing but smoke. The day grinds forward. The children's shoulders slump, the adults' faces harden, and the streets keep swallowing the weary tide of bodies. In every factory, workshop, and yard, the rhythm is the same. Clang, grind, shuffle, cough. Hours melt into each other like drops of sweat until night falls and the workers stumble back to their tenements. And you, trailing their weary steps, know you've only tasted the beginning of the day's wait. The clang of factory bells still echoes in your ears as you turn toward another current. Running through the slum, the uncertain path of children, you watch them scatter at the crossroads of their short lives, some clutching battered slates and chalks, others drifting toward the streets with coins to chase. Here the question hangs over every child, school or streets. You follow a thin boy with pale hair sticking up in every direction. He's no taller than the broom he carries, and his boots have holes so wide his toes peek through. He's headed toward a ragged classroom tucked into the side of a church. The sound of voices drifts through the open doorway, children chanting their alphabet, though many stumble, more familiar with market cries than letters. Inside, the desks are rough planks on trestles. Ink stains mark the surface like scars. The teacher, stern but exhausted, waves a stick not so much as a weapon but as a reminder to pay attention. On the blackboard, crooked handwriting spells out, "God is good." The boy squints, mouthing the words, his lips moving silently. His hunger competes with his lesson. One mainstream historical fact: by the 1870s, Britain introduced compulsory elementary education, at least in theory. The Education Act of 1870 was meant to drag even the poorest children into classrooms. But in practice, families still pulled kids from school whenever wages were short, and the law was patchy. Inspectors might wag their fingers, but hungry bellies shouted louder. You slip outside again, and the contrast is stark. Just down the lane, a different group of children huddles under a lamppost, their eyes sharp, their hands quicker. One girl is hawking newspapers, shouting headlines about Parliament scandals she cannot read herself. Another boy clutches a bundle of shoeshine brushes, scanning boots for a paying customer. They grin, they jostle, they trade insults like currency. Childhood here is a marketplace of wits, not a playground. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some street kids trained themselves to cry on command, knowing tears could loosen the purses of sympathetic passers-by. A well-timed sob might win a coin. A convincing sniffle could mean dinner. It was acting school, Victorian edition, except your audience was half drunk and your stage smelled of horse manure. Historians still argue whether these street trades gave children a kind of independence or doomed them to lifelong poverty. Was the newsboy who sold 1,000 papers on Fleet Street learning grit, or just trapped in the same rut his father knew? From your place in the shadows, you can't tell. You just see small figures hustling harder than most adults today would ever imagine. The classroom bell clangs and pupils spill into the yard. Their voices rise high and thin like birds chattering. One girl skips rope made of frayed string, chanting a rhyme. Another scribbles numbers in chalk on the stone wall, determined to master sums before hunger distracts her again. The teacher watches with tired pride, though he knows many of them will vanish before the week is out, pulled back into labor. You trail one boy as he leaves. He's torn between both worlds, his slate still tucked under one arm, but his other hand reaching for a bundle of matchboxes from a shopkeeper. His mother waits at home, and if he sells well, they'll eat. If not, the slate might have to go. That's the knife-edge balance of a Victorian childhood. Even play is colored by work. You pass a group rolling hoops down the street, their laughter filling the air, but you notice the hoops are actually discarded barrel rings. A girl cradles a rag doll made from sewn-together scraps, stuffing poking out. Toys are improvised, made from whatever the city throws away, and yet the joy is real, quick, and contagious. For a moment you almost forget the grinding reality. The school bell tolls again, pulling a new group of children into the yard, their faces wary, their hands grubby. They sit, they scratch their letters, they fidget. And as you lean against the doorway, you realize how fragile this experiment is. Education here is not guaranteed. It is a candle in the fog, flickering against stronger winds of hunger and labor. One boy coughs harshly, the sound rattling his chest, and the teacher gently sends him home. Outside, he sits on the curb, waiting for his older sister to finish shining boots. His slate rests on his knees, forgotten, as he watches the busy street with hollow eyes. You want to ask him which world he belongs to, the classroom or the street, but you already know the answer, whichever one feeds him today. Your path bends with the crowd, away from schools and workshops toward the daily ritual that decides whether a family eats, the hunt for food. Hunger is not a passing sensation here. It's a constant hum, like the faint ringing in your ears after a loud bell. You feel it in your gut as you drift with the women and children carrying baskets toward the market, their coins clutched tight as though the air itself might try to snatch them away. The first stop is the bread line. A queue already snakes down the lane, each person shuffling forward with weary patience. The baker's shop smells heavenly, yeasty and warm, but the loaves handed out are often yesterday's, tough as stone and sold cheap. A woman ahead of you sighs as she trades her last penny for a loaf half the size of her hand. Still, she presses it to her chest like treasure, knowing it must stretch across 6 mouths tonight. One mainstream historical fact. The price of bread in Victorian Britain was a constant point of tension. When grain prices rose, riots broke out, and newspapers filled with fiery debates. Bread wasn't just food, it was survival currency. No wonder entire families measured their lives in crusts and crumbs. You follow a child carrying a cracked bowl toward the soup kitchen. The queue here is longer, filled with gaunt faces, hollow eyes. A priest ladles thin broth into bowls, the liquid splashing as steam rises. The soup is watery, flavored faintly with bones boiled to exhaustion. You dip your head closer and catch a whiff. Onions, cabbage, a whisper of meat if you imagine hard enough. For many, this single bowl will be the only hot food of the day. A fringe tidbit makes you chuckle darkly. Some pawnshops, desperate for customers, offered tickets redeemable for meals at local chop houses. You'd pawn your coat or boots, then stagger down the street clutching your meal ticket, which bought you stew thick with grease. It was a strange sort of economy. Trade warmth on your back for warmth in your stomach. Imagine explaining that swap to your future self. Yes, I ate well, but now I'm barefoot in January. The market itself bustles with noise and smells. Stalls creak under the weight of vegetables, fish, or scraps of meat. You notice that much of what's sold here wouldn't make it into a middle-class kitchen. Bruised apples, wilted greens, offal glistening under flies. One stall sells sheep's heads, eyes still intact, while another hawks eels writhing in shallow tubs of water. The fishmonger shouts louder than the stink of the Thames clinging to his wares. Fresh! Fresh today? Though freshness is a very relative concept. Historians still argue whether the poor truly embraced these odd cuts and creatures, or whether they ate them simply because nothing else was affordable. Was jellied eel a delicacy of ingenuity, or just desperation boiled in vinegar? Either way, the vendors sold plenty. Coins clink, bargains are shouted, and occasionally a scuffle breaks out when someone tries to snatch food without paying. You step aside as 2 women argue furiously over the price of a cabbage, their voices sharp as knives. A constable strolls by, twirling his truncheon with affected indifference, only stepping in if fists start flying. The pawn shop down the lane draws you in next. Its windows display rows of mismatched objects: boots, coats, pocket watches, candlesticks. Inside, the air is thick with musty cloth. A man lays a violin on the counter, his hands trembling as though letting go of more than wood and strings. The pawnbroker weighs it with a calculating stare, then pushes forward a few coins. It's never enough. Desperation rarely bargains well. You notice another man pawning his wedding ring, cheeks flushed with shame. He mutters something about buying bread for his children. The pawnbroker shrugs. He's heard every story before. It's not cruelty so much as the cold machinery of poverty grinding on. Tomorrow that ring may glitter on another man's hand while the original owner shuffles home with half a loaf and a hollow heart. Outside again you catch the faint song of street vendors. Hot chestnuts! Hot pies! A boy scampers past carrying a tray strapped to his shoulders, the pastries steaming. You can smell the flaky crust, though you know the filling is mostly air with a whisper of meat. Still, the aroma makes your mouth water, and your stomach growls in sympathy with the hungry crowd. The day wears on, and hunger remains the silent companion of everyone you pass. Children gnaw on crusts, mothers sip weak tea, fathers chew tobacco to dull the pangs. Food is not pleasure, it is survival, rationed out in crumbs and spoonfuls. measured against the clink of too few coins. And as the markets close, unsold scraps are swept into gutters where ragged boys dive to snatch them before the rats do. You watch one lad snatch a bruised apple, polishing it on his sleeve with exaggerated pride, as though he's just claimed the crown jewels. Hunger reshapes value here. Every scrap is treasure, every crumb a feast. The day drifts onward, and you soon notice that hunger is not the only companion in the slum. Illness lingers in every cough, every ragged breath, every fevered flush on a child's cheek. The streets themselves feel like breeding grounds for sickness. You hear it in the hacking coughs echoing from alleyways. See it in the pale faces leaning from windows. Smell it in the foul drains that snake between the buildings. You pass a pump where women line up with buckets, the iron handle squealing as they draw water. The liquid that gushes out is cloudy, swirling with faint flecks. Still, it is carried away and poured into pots for cooking or tea. You sip it once, gag, and set the cup down. One mainstream historical fact: contaminated water spread cholera again and again in Victorian London. It wasn't until Dr. John Snow mapped outbreaks in the 1850s that people began to realize the connection between water pumps and disease. And yet, even decades later, many pumps remained unprotected. Imagine sipping your daily dose of microbes and calling it breakfast. Inside the tenements, illness spreads like gossip. A single cough rattles through thin walls, passed from family to family. You watch a mother dab her child's forehead with a rag dipped in vinegar, hoping to draw out the fever. Next door, an old man wheezes in rhythm with the creak of his chair, his chest rising and falling like bellows on the edge of collapse. Everyone knows someone who has been taken by the fever. Then comes the fringe tidbit. Some Victorians genuinely believed that wearing flannel next to the skin warded off colds and disease. Whole pamphlets were published praising the gospel of flannel. You can almost imagine people preaching, "Repent and cover thy chest." If only germs respected woolen undershirts. The air itself is poison. Coal smoke pours from chimneys, coating lungs and leaving throats raw. You trail a factory worker as he staggers home, his cough wet, his face smeared black with soot. He spits into the gutter, and the phlegm gleams dark as tar. Historians still argue whether slum mortality rates were driven more by industrial pollution or by overcrowding. Was it the air outside or the walls inside that killed faster? Either way, the statistics are bleak. Life expectancy in some districts dropped to the 30s. Imagine hitting your midlife crisis at 28. Doctors are scarce here, and when they appear, their remedies border on comedy. You peek into a dingy apothecary shop, shelves lined with colored bottles, powders, and tonics. The chemist pushes bottles of laudanum, an opium tincture, as though it were cough syrup. Children, adults, the elderly, everyone drinks it to quiet pain. It soothes for a while, but addiction creeps silently, making the cure worse than the sickness. A poster flaps on the wall outside. Try Dr. Bostock's lung elixir. Promises of miraculous healing plaster every corner, though few can afford the price. Inside the tenements, cheaper cures circulate. Onions tied around the neck, mustard plasters slapped on chests, leeches applied to draw out bad blood. You wince, but then again, when official medicine fails, even garlic necklaces start sounding reasonable. You step into a cramped room where a child lies bundled in blankets, sweat dripping down his forehead. His mother fans him with a scrap of cardboard, whispering prayers. The air is heavy, the smell sour. She glances at you with hollow eyes, as though asking if you have an answer. You don't, few did. And in the next room, another mother hums to a baby, coughing in syncopated rhythm, a lullaby underscored by disease. Outside again, you pass by the ragged outlines of fever vans, black carts sent to carry the sick to isolation hospitals. Neighbors watch nervously as a patient is loaded inside, whispering that no one who leaves ever comes back. The stigma of disease is nearly as heavy as the illness itself. Some families even hid their sick members, fearing eviction or separation. Better to suffer quietly than risk the shame. The city authorities argue endlessly over solutions. Some demand better sanitation. Others shrug, blaming the poor for their own plight. Historians still argue whether reform came from genuine compassion or the fear that disease might creep into richer districts. After all, cholera didn't ask for your income before knocking on your door. Even parliamentarians worried when outbreaks crossed from the slums into respectable neighborhoods. And yet, amidst this gloom, there is resilience. You see a woman sweeping her doorway, determined to push back the filth. You see children laughing despite runny noses, kicking a rag ball through puddles. You see a man lighting his pipe, coughing but smiling anyway, muttering something about how the smoke keeps the bad air out. It doesn't, but you can't help admiring the stubborn defiance. Illness stalks every corner here, an invisible neighbor you cannot evict. But life clings on too, coughing, sneezing, limping, laughing. And as you pass another coughing child, you realize, in this slum, survival itself is the most ordinary miracle. The coughs and rattling carts fade behind you as you wander toward another corner of slum life, where survival is stitched together not with bread or medicine, but with scraps of cloth. Clothing here tells its own story, a patchwork of poverty, ingenuity, and pride. You notice first the colors, or rather, the lack of them. Browns, grays, and blacks dominate, dulled by soot and endless wear. A child scurries past in trousers so short his ankles show, the hems frayed into tassels. His sister trails behind, wearing a dress with mismatched sleeves, one blue, one faded green. Clothes are not fashion here. They are inherited burdens. You follow them into the bustle of the rag market. Stalls sprawl across the square, heaps of second-hand garments piled high. The air smells of damp wool, unwashed bodies, and a faint sharpness of mothballs. Shoppers dig elbow-deep into the piles, searching for something sturdy, something without too many holes. A woman holds up a coat, shakes it out, and frowns at the moth-eaten lining. Still, she haggles because a thin coat is better than none. One mainstream historical fact, Britain in the 19th century developed a thriving rag trade. Old clothes were collected, sorted and resold again and again. Some ended up in slums, others were shredded into fibers for shoddy cloth. Shoddy wasn't just an insult, it was an actual textile made of recycled fibers pressed into new fabric. Cheap, brittle, and infamous for falling apart after a few washes, it clothed the poor for decades. As you move between stalls, you notice quirky improvisations. A boy ties twine around his shoes to keep the soles from flapping. A woman wears a shawl pieced from flour sacks, the faded brand name still visible. A man struts proudly in a patched waistcoat, each patch a different pattern, making him look like a walking quilt. Fashion? No. Resourcefulness? Absolutely. And maybe a touch of pride. After all, if you must wear rags, why not wear them loudly? Historians still argue whether clothing in slums served more as a marker of shame or resilience. Was a patched coat a symbol of defeat or a testament to survival? Watching the crowd, you sense both truths, the sting of judgment from outsiders and the quiet pride of making do with what you have. At the edge of the market stands a tailor's shop. Inside, the tailor bends over a candle, needle flashing. His fingers are rough, calloused from constant stitching. Customers trickle in, carrying bundles of garments to be mended. One lays down a coat with holes at the elbows. Another presents boots worn nearly to the sole. The tailor promises repairs, though his eyes already show the strain of too many orders. His work is not luxury, it is triage, keeping clothes alive a little longer. Outside, a rag-and-bone man pushes his cart, calling for scraps. He buys bones, rags, and even old metal, paying in pennies. Children chase behind him, hoping to earn a coin by trading whatever they scavenge. Rags will end up in the mills, bones in glue factories, and the cycle turns again. Poverty wastes nothing. You pass a family huddled near a doorway. The father carefully darns a sock while his wife braids strips of fabric into a makeshift rug. Their children giggle, trying on hats far too large for their heads, crowns in a kingdom of cracked stones and peeling paint. For a moment, the rags become costumes and play replaces hunger. There's a darker side, too. Clothes, or the lack of them, reveal vulnerability. A barefoot child shivers in the chill, her only covering a thin shift. You see women wrapping themselves in shawls to guard not only against cold, but also against the stares of men in gin shops. Clothing is protection, even if that protection is paper-thin. You duck under a line of laundry strung across the alley. Shirts flap like surrender flags, dripping onto your shoulders. Soap is scarce, so the clothes still carry stains of sweat and soot, but they're hung with pride. Washing day is an act of defiance, a way of saying, we may be poor, but we are not defeated. And then, the curious tidbit, some charitable missions handed out discarded uniforms, military jackets, police coats, even theater costumes. Imagine a slum lane where half the children run about dressed as miniature soldiers, while their mothers scrub steps in stage gowns. Poverty has no room for dignity. Fabric is fabric, the sun dips lower and shadows lengthen. People fold their new purchases under arms, tie bundles with string, or simply wear their ragged acquisitions on the spot. The square empties, leaving scraps of cloth fluttering in the breeze, picked over by stray dogs. You walk away with the sense that clothing here is never just clothing. It is shelter, identity, and survival stitched into every seam. It is shame worn on the outside, but also proof that life, however tattered, keeps moving forward one patched elbow at a time. The evening bells toll. Echoing between the crooked roofs, and the slum begins to shift into its Sunday rhythm. For one day each week, the gears of industry grind to a slower pace, and the weary bodies of the poor seek out scraps of relief. You follow the current of people through the alleys, and you feel the change in the air, not cleaner, not brighter, but looser somehow, as though the city exhales for just a few hours. Church bells ring first. Women pull shawls tighter, men dust off coats that haven't been brushed in months, and children are lined up with hair combed flat, though the dirt under their nails never quite goes away. Inside the chapel you slip into a back pew. Wooden benches creak under the weight of families. Hymns rise, rough and unpolished, but sung with a strength that pushes back against the week's misery. The preacher thunders about salvation, and though his words promise eternity, you can't help noticing that the congregation looks more focused on the hot tea and biscuits waiting after the service. For some, religion is faith. For others, it's just free refreshments. One mainstream historical fact: by the mid-19th century, the Church of England and countless nonconformist chapels ran missions in the slums, hoping to save both souls and stomachs. Soup kitchens, Sunday schools, and charity visits became common. Critics, of course, argued over whether this was true compassion or simply moral policing disguised as kindness. As the service ends, the crowd spills back into the lanes, and Sunday transforms again. Music drifts from a nearby hall. You step inside and find a makeshift stage where fiddlers and singers perform for a noisy audience. Laughter rings out, mugs slam on tables, and voices rise in chorus to bawdy songs. Here the poor carve out joy from gin and melody. A man beside you shouts that the fiddler plays like an angel with dirty boots. He's not wrong. There's real talent here, wasted perhaps, but alive nonetheless. Historians still argue whether music halls were moral decay or cultural lifelines. Respectable society wrung its hands about drunkenness and loose songs, but for slum dwellers these halls offered cheap tickets to forgetfulness, a rare chance to laugh louder than their troubles. You wander further and find yourself outside a gin shop. The windows glow invitingly, and the door swings constantly as customers shuffle in and out. Inside, the air is thick with fumes, sharp, sweet, intoxicating. Glasses clink, voices roar, and laughter tips into arguments that sometimes spill onto the street. You sip once, and the gin burns like liquid fire, stripping your throat raw. It costs only a few pennies, far less than a full meal, which is precisely why it's so popular. Here comes the fringe tidbit. One Victorian gin brand was actually marketed with the slogan, "Mother's Ruin." People joked about it, but the name stuck for grim reasons. Women often drowned despair in cheap gin, and reformers blamed alcohol for poverty itself, as though a single bottle were responsible for an entire system's misery. You might smirk at the irony, except the glass in your hand already makes you woozy. Outside, the streets are alive in their own way. Children play skipping games, chanting rhymes passed down through generations. Boys kick a ragball through puddles, their laughter sharp against the night. Couples stroll arm in arm, sharing a crust of bread or a borrowed joke. Even the tired faces soften, as though Sunday lends them permission to be human again. You notice small gatherings in alleys, neighbors sharing scraps, men puffing clay pipes, women exchanging gossip. One family sits on the stoop with a fiddle, the father playing while children clap along. The tune is crooked but cheerful, carrying above the noise of the street. For a moment the slum feels like a village, dirty, crowded, but bound by shared rhythm. And yet, Sunday is not entirely carefree. You glance at a constable pacing outside the gin shop, his eyes scanning for fights. You hear a preacher in the distance shouting warnings against sin. You see a woman stumble into the gutter, clutching her gin bottle like it's her last possession. Relief teeters constantly on the edge of ruin. The night deepens and the air cools. Candles glow in windows, casting crooked squares of light on the damp stones. Somewhere a lullaby drifts. Somewhere else a rowdy song rises. You feel the two forces tugging at each other, faith and laughter, sobriety and gin, despair and resilience. Sunday doesn't erase the slum's misery, but it offers a pause. A fragile shelter where souls can breathe before the factory whistle calls again at dawn. The laughter from Sunday's music halls fades behind you, and as night deepens, the streets take on another character altogether. Shadows stretch longer, alleys grow quieter, and yet the slum never truly sleeps. You feel eyes on you from dark corners, and the hairs on your neck rise as you realize that not all the city's workers retire peacefully at night. Some clock in after dusk, plying trades that thrive in secrecy. A boy no older than 12 sidles up to a distracted passerby, his fingers moving faster than thought, lifting a pocket watch and vanishing into the darkness. He grins as he disappears, and you realize he's part of a whole network of child pickpockets. They move like schools of fish, dotting in and out of the crowd. One mainstream historical fact, entire gangs of street children in Victorian London were trained by adult criminals, much like the fictional Fagin's crew in Oliver Twist. It wasn't just literature, it was reality. Small hands were perfect for slipping into coats, and hungry stomachs made eager apprentices. You trail one such gang into an alley where their spoils are passed to an older man with a crooked hat and sharper eyes. He claps a boy on the shoulder, then flicks a coin at him. Payment made, loyalty bought. The shadows swallow them all again. Further down, the mood grows darker. You pass a group of young men leaning against a wall, their caps pulled low. They're part of a slum gang, territorial, restless, quick with fists and knives. Their slang drifts toward you in fragments, sharp as broken glass. They boast of fights won and jobs pulled, daring one another into louder bravado. Historians still argue whether such gangs were born purely of poverty or whether the thrill of rebellion had its own magnetism. Either way, you don't linger long, and then comes the quirky tidbit. Rescue societies also prowled these streets at night, determined to save souls one by one. You catch sight of a group of stern-faced men and women in black coats, tracts in hand, who descend on a cluster of young girls outside a gin shop. They press pamphlets about virtue and redemption into reluctant hands, offering prayers instead of pennies. Some girls nod politely, others roll their eyes, slipping away the moment backs are turned. Imagine trying to hand out inspirational flyers at a nightclub today. You'd get about the same reception. The deeper you wander, the more you notice contrasts. On one side, a thief slinks down a passage, clutching a stolen loaf. On the other, a mission worker kneels beside a sick man, murmuring prayers. Vice and virtue weave around each other like threads in the same fraying cloth. You pass a doorway where a woman leans, her painted smile dim in the lamplight. She beckons with a tired hand, her laughter brittle. Sex work, too, thrived in the slums, where survival often meant selling whatever could be sold. Reformers railed against fallen women, while customers kept the trade alive night after night. The hypocrisy hangs heavy in the fog, as sharp as the smell of gin on the breath of men stumbling by. A constable rounds the corner, truncheon tapping against his leg. He eyes the groups with suspicion, but doesn't intervene unless absolutely forced. The law in these streets is more about show than action. Too many crimes, too few officers. Besides, the slum has its own justice, swift and brutal. Cross the wrong gang, and you may not see daylight again. The night deepens further. Lanterns flicker, rats scurry, footsteps echo. A baby cries from an upstairs window, blending with drunken shouts. Somewhere a fiddle plays, eerie in its isolation. You catch sight of a man running, clutching something under his coat, a shout of, "Stop thief!" echoing behind him. No one moves to help. Survival here means minding your own business. Historians still argue whether slum crime was exaggerated by middle-class journalists hoping to stir outrage, or whether it was truly as rampant as the newspapers claimed. The truth, as always, probably lies in between. For the people who lived here, crime wasn't an abstract debate. It was the knock on the door, the missing coin, the bruise on the arm, and yet, amidst the fear, there are flickers of solidarity. You see neighbors gather when a drunk collapses, lifting him out of the gutter before he's trampled. You see a boy share a stolen loaf with his younger sister, both of them chewing hungrily in the shadows. Even the gangs, for all their menace, form bonds stronger than many families. The night is thick now, silence broken only by the creak of shutters and the distant roar of the river. You stand still for a moment, the air cold against your face, and realize that the slum at night is not just dangerous, it is alive in a different register, humming with secrets, bargains, sins, and salvations. By dawn, many of these figures will vanish into the fog, leaving only footprints in the mud and echoes in memory. Dawn creeps pale and sluggish across the rooftops. And as the streets begin to stir again, another current of noise winds through the slum. Not the clang of factory bells, not the cries of hawkers, but the chatter of reform. You drift closer and the words roll over you. Debates, promises, anger, pity. Everyone has an opinion about the slums, though not everyone has to live in them. At the corner, a group of well-dressed visitors trudge behind a guide. Their shoes gleam, their collars are starched, and they clutch handkerchiefs to their noses as though the air itself were poisonous. These are slum tourists, middle-class men and women who come to gawk at poverty as though it were a theater show. You watch one lady point at a barefoot child, her face a mixture of horror and fascination. She whispers to her companion, who nods gravely, then scribbles notes for a dinner party anecdote later. One mainstream historical fact, such slumming tours were common by the 1880s. Journalists, philanthropists, and even curious aristocrats paid guides to lead them through the narrow alleys, all in the name of education or entertainment. They returned home shaken, sometimes inspired to campaign for reform, sometimes merely thrilled to have sampled danger at arm's length. You follow one group into a tenement yard. The tenants watch with blank stares, neither welcoming nor hostile, just weary of being displayed like specimens. A man mutters under his breath, too low for the visitors to hear, but sharp enough for you to catch. We are not animals in cages. Still, the tourists peer into doorways, gasp at the damp walls, and hurry away clutching their gloves. A few streets over, you stumble into a heated discussion between reformers. One man thunders about the need for better housing laws, his arms waving so wildly he nearly topples his hat. Another counters that charity breeds laziness, insisting the poor must lift themselves up. Their debate echoes down the street, bouncing off peeling brick like a tennis match of rhetoric. Historians still argue whether these reform efforts were driven by genuine compassion, social control, or a cocktail of both. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some reformers actually staged model dwellings, pristine apartments built to demonstrate how the poor could live if only they were tidy and sober. Visitors walked through these spotless rooms, nodding at the neat curtains and polished stoves. Of course, no one mentioned that rent for such model homes was often far higher than a slum family could afford. It was like showing someone a cake while telling them to be satisfied with cabbage. Journalists also play their part. You hear the scratch of pens as reporters jot descriptions of dark alleys, feverish children, and gin shops overflowing. The next day, their stories will splash across newspapers, stirring outrage among readers who may never set foot in these streets. Some articles push for reform. Others exploit misery for sensational headlines. "The Black Holes of London," one headline might scream, while the poor who live there simply call it home. You overhear landlords defending themselves at a meeting in a nearby hall. One insists his tenants are ungrateful, that he provides shelter at reasonable cost, ignoring the leaks, the rot, the overcrowding. Another waves rent books, pointing out punctual payments as proof of satisfaction. Their words float like smoke, filling the room with a haze of self-justification. You want to laugh, except the tenants outside aren't laughing, and yet reform does inch forward. Sanitation laws creep onto the books, housing acts tentatively nibble at overcrowding, inspectors occasionally stomp through with clipboards. But enforcement is patchy, and slumlords find loopholes faster than laws can close them. You see one inspector stride down the street, measuring walls with a tape, scribbling figures, frowning. Behind him, a landlord smirks, already planning to shuffle tenants just enough to dodge penalties. The slum itself seems almost amused by the fuss. Children still play in gutters, women still scrub steps, men still hawk labor in the morning. Life doesn't wait for reform debates. It grinds on, patched together day by day. The voices of reformers and landlords rise and fall, but the coughs, the hunger, the laughter all continue just the same. As the meeting breaks, pamphlets flutter into the street, trampled by boots. One reads, "Better housing means better morals." Another proclaims, "Down with slum tyrants." The paper soaks quickly in the mud, words blurring until they're unreadable. The message is drowned, quite literally, in the streets it hoped to save. And yet, you sense a shift. The outrage of journalists, the persistence of reformers, even the voyeurism of slum tourists, all add pressure, like water dripping steadily on stone. Change may be slow, but cracks appear. The slum may not vanish overnight, but whispers of progress echo between the brick walls. Stubborn as weeds pushing through cobblestones. The voices of reformers fade as you wander toward the docks. where the smell of tar, salt, and coal hangs heavy in the air. Here, you notice a different kind of conversation, quieter but urgent, dreams of escape. Families speak in hushed tones of tickets, steamships, and places where the streets are rumored to be cleaner, maybe even paved with gold. You pause by a warehouse where men in patched coats huddle together, studying a broadside nailed to the wall. It shows a sleek steamship, its smokestacks promising speed across the Atlantic. "Passage to America," the bold letters declare, "only a few pounds." The men trace the words with their fingers, calculating what few possessions might be pawned to buy a chance at that voyage. One mainstream historical fact: between the mid-19th and early 20th centuries, millions of Britons left for the colonies or the United States. Irish migrants fled famine, Scots left crofts, English slum dwellers abandoned soot-choked alleys. The dream of a better life was powerful enough to outweigh fear of the unknown. You trail a woman who clutches a letter close to her chest. She reads it aloud to her children. Their uncle in New York has found work in a factory, and he swears they can join him if they can scrape together the fare. Her voice trembles, but her eyes shine with hope. The children gaze at the letter as though it were a treasure map. Down by the docks, you overhear sailors shouting, ropes groaning, gulls squawking. A group of men argue with a ticket agent, their voices sharp, desperate. One insists he has enough coins, but the clerk shakes his head. The man slams his fist on the counter, then slumps away, muttering about selling his boots. Hope here is measured in shillings, and then the fringe tidbit. Some migrants who couldn't afford tickets signed indenture contracts, agreeing to work for years in exchange for passage. Imagine signing away half a decade of your life just to step on a ship. Some never returned, their slum memories traded for different struggles abroad. Historians still argue whether these migrations truly lifted families out of poverty, or whether they simply traded one hardship for another. For every success story of farms in Canada or shops in New York, there were tales of migrants who found only more slums, just across an ocean. Yet the dream persisted, stubborn as weeds in cracked stone. You watch as a young man boards a ship, clutching a small trunk. His mother stands on the quay, wiping her eyes with her apron. She calls out a blessing as he waves, face pale with fear but lit with determination. The gangplank rises, the ship's whistle blows, and the vessel lurches away into the gray water. Behind him, the mother sinks onto a crate, staring at the empty space her son once filled. Back in the slum, the talk continues. Some boast that they'll leave next year once they've saved enough. Others scoff, insisting there's no point chasing false promises. And some simply sigh, knowing they will never leave, their roots tangled too tightly in the narrow alleys and damp walls. You notice a boy carving the word America into a wooden board, his knife scratching letters with fierce determination. His father chuckles wearily, but lets him keep at it. Even if the boy never sails, the dream itself gives him something beyond soot and sickness to hold on to. As you drift away from the docks, you feel the pull of two worlds, one rooted in the narrow, crowded lanes of the slum, the other stretching outward toward unknown horizons. Neither offers certainty, only choices, gritty survival here or risky hope elsewhere. And yet, for many, the dream of leaving is enough to make another day in the slum bearable. The gangplank lowers in your memory, the steamship fades into the mist, and once again you find yourself back within the slum, where night settles with heavy familiarity. The alleys narrow, shadows stretch, and the sounds of the day melt into a different kind of music. Creaks, whispers, coughs, and the soft hum of survival. You step quietly now, as though the stones themselves are dozing. Inside a tenement, families prepare for bed. A candle flickers weakly, shadows dancing across cracked plaster. Children curl together under thin blankets, their bare feet tangled. A mother hums softly, her lullaby competing with the muffled cough of her neighbor through the wall. The air smells of damp straw and smoke, the fragrance of exhaustion. A man pulls off his boots and rubs his blistered feet, sighing with a sound that seems to drain out of his very bones. He mutters about the factory whistle that will come too soon. His wife rolls up her shawl as a pillow, stretching her back on the straw mattress. They do not speak of dreams, only of rest. You drift into another room where two children whisper in the dark. One tells a story about a prince with golden shoes who never has to sweep chimneys. The other giggles, though her laugh turns into a wheeze. Fairy tales are a kind of medicine here, thin but better than none. One mainstream historical fact, reports from reformers often described slum nights as louder than the day. With so many people crammed into so little space, quiet was rare. The groan of floorboards, the crying of infants, the clatter of chamber pots being emptied, all blended into a restless lullaby. Imagine trying to fall asleep to a symphony of coughs, snores, and dripping leaks, and yet even here small acts of tenderness survive. A father tucks the edge of a blanket tighter around his son. A grandmother strokes a child's hair until his breathing steadies. A mother folds her hands in silent prayer, her lips moving against the dark. The quirky tidbit: some tenement rooms doubled as workplaces at night. You pass a weaver crouched over a loom, clacking threads long after sunset. A tailor stitches by candlelight, his needle flashing as others sleep around him. Bed and workshop blurred, rest and labor shared the same narrow space. Sleep was a luxury often postponed until exhaustion demanded it. Historians still argue whether the poor found community in these crowded nights, or whether constant noise frayed bonds further. Were they bound together by necessity or pushed apart by lack of space? Listening closely, you can almost hear both answers layered in the soundscape. Laughter mingled with arguments, comfort stitched with resentment. The night deepens. Outside, footsteps echo faintly. A drunk stumbles home. A cart rattles by, carrying refuse. Somewhere a fiddle scratches a tune, thin but steady. Somewhere else, a baby wails, only to be soothed back into silence. The slum does not sleep. It drifts in and out of uneasy dozes, a great body tossing and turning on a mattress of stone and straw. You sit on a low stoop, feeling the cold seep into your bones. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of distant coughs and the murmurs of neighbors telling stories to stave off the dark. And as your head dips, you realize the slum has rocked you into its own strange lullaby, rough, grim, but undeniably human. The alleys fade now, softening at the edges. The soot on the walls, the dripping pumps, the cracked plaster, all blur as if washed gently by rain. The coughs and clatter grow fainter, replaced by a low hum, like distant waves or the steady turning of a fan. You let the noise fall away until only quiet remains. Your breathing slows. The weight of the day, the markets, the factories, the endless walking slips from your shoulders. You picture the slum not as a maze of bricks, but as a lantern slowly dimming, its glow soft and small, flickering into calm. The rooms you pass through shrink to whispers. The faces you glimpse dissolve into shadows. Only the rhythm of rest remains, a baby's sigh, a mother's lullaby, the hush of tired voices settling into silence. Imagine the city itself leaning back, closing its weary eyes, its heartbeat softening with yours. You stretch out now, no longer on damp stone or a straw mattress, but in your own bed, safe and warm. The discomforts of the past slip away like smoke in the air. The stories linger only as gentle echoes, not sharp, not heavy, just reminders of lives once lived, of strength found in hardship. Each breath carries you deeper, slower. The fog that once stung your lungs now cools your face like mist on a quiet morning. The flickering candle becomes a star, steady above you. The cramped rooms widen into open fields where nothing presses in, nothing demands, and as you drift you hear only stillness. No footsteps, no coughing, no cries, just calm, smooth, endless quiet. Let yourself sink into it without fear, without weight. Sleep takes your hand now, steady and kind, leading you into dreams where you can finally rest.